This is Dr. Peggy Semingson, Associate Professor of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Texas at Arlington. This podcast series shares success tips from faculty on academic productivity. The views shared by faculty are their own. In this podcast, Dr. Colleen Fitzgerald, Professor of Linguistics, shares ideas about building momentum in one's own writing. We are talking to Professor Colleen Fitzgerald of the University of Texas at Arlington. And can you share with us about what are your best tips for staying productive in writing and publishing?
Well, one thing I always do is I have a list. So I have my project list, things that I want to work on, things that I see that I could do. And so I try to have that list in a place where I can see it so that I have reminders that this is on my horizon. And then, so I'm very list oriented, and I use that in a way to kind of keep my mental thoughts organized. Another thing that I do is I think about the year ahead of me and what conferences I'm going to go to. So I try to make sure that what I want to write will be feeding into those conferences. And then I can use those conferences as ways to push the work along further because I have an external deadline. So those are some different things that I do. Another thing that I've done, well, one of my philosophies is that anything I spend a lot of time on, I would like to get a publication out of. So I do a lot of service learning, and I do things with my students in indigenous language communities. And so I try to write about scholarship and teaching of learning. So there are journals that are, for example, Language and Education is one where I've published. And so I try to pull out from the work that I'm doing aspects that are perhaps not as traditionally research oriented, but I work on harvesting them in such a way that I can get publications out of it. Yet another strategy that I've employed is to look at the table of contents in journals that I'm interested in and getting ideas about what things I could look at in the languages that I work on or the kinds of problems that I work on. So using awareness of the field, awareness of the discipline as a way to keep the juices flowing. So that's something I really like to look at conferences for seeing what kinds of venues would be good places to present certain kinds of topics. I like to look at journals, table of contents to see what kinds of work is out there and how I might find those angles in my own work. I also find that writing grants, even when they're not funded, is incredibly productive for me. While the actual grant writing is usually a mode where I'm what I call on social lockdown. So I basically have a period of time for grant writing where I do not schedule anything, nothing social, very little work-wise. I anticipate that I'm not going to be able to get to the gym, and I put myself on this sort of lockdown to focus on the grant so that I have basically, I want to have time where I'm not productive so that when I'm productive, it's all laid out for me and I have that time and space. So I also try to work in that downtime which I think we all have, where you sit at the computer and you cannot make yourself write. You cannot make yourself get down to business. So I anticipate that I'm going to have some of that time, and I build it in, especially when it is something like a grant deadline. So I know that that's coming, and there is an absolute submission date, and you can't exceed it. But what I find is that the process of writing grants forces me to articulate what I'm working on, what I'm interested in, why it's interesting or crucial for the discipline, and pushes my research further. And I can often take what I've used in a grant application and harvest it for other papers. So for me, grants, and I have had lots of success in grants, but I have had even more failures in grants. And so even though I have had those failures, that I've learned so much from each of those projects, and I've also been able to use it as a lens to look at where I'm going with my work. So I think having to write that in a particular length, 15 pages, for example, for an NSF narrative, that is something that really helps me structure my thoughts so that I can then push it into something that would be a paper.
So it helps you stay organized.
Yeah, it helps
Okay.
me stay organized.
That's
yeah.
great. And then do you have any other thoughts on your habits or processes as a writer?
So I do field work, and I work with a lot of language communities in Oklahoma. And so I have driving time, and I actually find that to be some of my most productive time for thinking about what I want to work on. There's nothing you can do when you're in the country in rural Oklahoma driving down the highway. There's nothing you can do. And so it's actually an incredibly creative zone for me because I have to focus on driving, but that can still be backgrounded. I'm able to really free my mind up of the ordinary things in life that often distract us from thinking about our work and our research. So I don't know that it's a strategy that works for everyone, but I know that driving or taking a shower, these are the kinds of things that seem like they're not work, but what they do is they free you up in a way that allows your subconscious to kind of emerge and allows you to think about what you want to do.
Do you take notes when that happens, or is it all mental?
No, I don't take notes.
Yeah.
I'm always thinking in the car too that I should really do voice memos, but I never actually do. And on the rare occasion that I have actually done voice memos, I actually don't look at them. So
That's funny.
yeah.
That's great.
So yeah, that's why. And actually, I have to do writing lists in lots and lots of places because I often will put out reminders to myself and then ignore where I've put the reminder. So I'm one of those people who would put a note on my chair because it used to be I could sit on the chair. Oh, I'm not going to sit in the paper, but now I realize I actually sit on the paper and ignore my reminder.
Yeah.
So I try to kind of make things everywhere. Sometimes I'll have whiteboards in my office and I'll have my little list of what I want to work on.
That makes sense.
Yeah, so
multiple reminders.
multiple reminders.
Oh, good idea. Well, that's great. Anything else you want to add? Tips?
Oh, this is what I was going to add. I'm probably, like many academics, too hard on myself, and I find it hard to think of all the backstory that you have to do to write a paper as work. And I sort of don't count it as work, except if I'm actually writing. But I think that's probably a bad strategy because it's not so positive. But one of the things that you can do in terms of putting a project together is to make a list of the different stages. And even if you really, really feel like you're struggling and you're blocked, make the list as detailed as you can and cross things off. The act of crossing things off feels good. It's nice to get things off our list. But what I also think it does is momentum. For me, when you are in a writing groove, when I am in a writing groove, it is all about momentum. And I have never surfed, but I always say that when I've got that writing fever, I just want to ride that wave until I hit the beach and can't write anymore. We never know when we're going to be blocked. So if we are free and able to write, just be a writing ninja and get it all out.
I like that. Yeah, I'm from California, so I like your metaphor.
Good,
The wave. Stay on top of the wave.
That's right.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, thank you so
You're
much.
welcome. So I've also found it to be the case that writing something tiny can give you productivity, can give you that boost. So whether it's writing an abstract, or I've been writing some advocacy pieces and for public outreach, that's a great way to clear off my mental space and be able to write because it's something small, it's easy to edit. I can just bang it out and then finesse it, and it makes me feel good about writing again and can really get the juices flowing. So something small as a starter to get you going.
That momentum.
That momentum.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sometimes I blog for that reason.
I'm all about momentum.
Yeah.